stretch marks are those moments that God stretches your faith in a new way. Um, and here's why he does it. He stretches you so that he can enlarge you to do something greater. That's the whole purpose. And if you look back in your life, can you remember those moments that, man, I was kind of scared to do this, but I did it. He stretched you in that area. You didn't think you were ready. You didn't think you're able to do this, but he kind of pulled you a little. And I didn't know, like, you're tired of looking at me. Just turn them lights off. He kind of pulls you a little bit, and it was just a moment that God just, it's kind of a marking of your faith. But there's also those times that you feel you're supposed to and you caved and you didn't. I've learned that in those moments, those marks, that I either allow him to stretch me and he does something great, or I cower back and I feel like I missed a moment. That's what we're talking about on stretch marks. And as we dig deeper into this morning, I want to hit those things that really matter the most. Because there's moments that I'm afraid that I might miss something. I don't know about you, but I think those marks in our lives, if we really saw those as powerful moments, if we really saw them for what God was trying to do in us, we wouldn't miss the marks. We wouldn't miss those times. So it's those moments that matter. Tell your neighbor it's those moments. Don't neglect the moments. It's those moments. Y'all didn't tell your neighbor. I saw like one person tell them. Everybody just looked at me. Some of you are looking. I'm not preaching on who's your neighbor this morning. I ought to. Let's tell the story of the Good Samaritan here. But we're going to get into the Word. In Mark chapter 6, verse 45, it says this, that immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he sent the multitude away. And when he had sent them away, he departed to the mountain to pray. Now when evening came, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land. Then he saw them struggling at rowing, for the wind was against them. Now about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea, and would have passed them by. And when they saw him walking on the sea, they supposed it was a ghost and cried out. For they all saw him and were troubled. But immediately he talked with them and said to them, Be of good cheer. It is I, do not be afraid. Then he went up into the boat to them, and the wind ceased. And they were greatly amazed in themselves beyond measure and marveled. All right, tell your neighbor, and you can be seated. This is the last thing. I want to hear you say it, though. Tell your neighbor this matters. This matters. This matters. What you're doing right now matters. Come on. And there's those moments. What matters? This matters. I feel like so many times we miss the things in our lives that matter. And one of my biggest fears as a parent, as a husband, is that I will look back at my life and realize that the things I focused my time and my energy on the most really didn't matter. That all the things that I put ahead of what really was important that I will have missed those moments, that I will have missed those times. Because listen, there are moments in your life that matter more than others. Come on, do you know that's true? There are moments in your life that matter more than others. And for the disciples, this was one of those moments. This was one of those moments that mattered more than anything at the time. I mean, this was one of those moments. I mean, you have Jesus walking on water. I mean, how many know that's an important moment right there for the disciples? A defining moment for the disciples. Jesus walking on water. He's defying the laws of physics that he wrote, by the way. He's the one that said you can't walk on. He's the one that made that surface not able to walk on. And then he goes and he walks on. He defies the laws of physics that he even wrote. And he comes walking on water to them. And what he's doing is at that moment, he's revealing to them that he is God, that he is the Son of God, he is the Messiah, that he's different than the others, that he's not just a man, he's not just a teacher, but that he is God. In that moment, it matters. How many know that? This moment mattered. And as I'm looking through this, there's a few things that I just want to point out, because there's this one phrase that it says that the wind was against them. That they got into the boat just as Jesus commanded them. They got into the boat. They were rowing to Bethsaida like he instructed them to do. And the wind was blowing against them. And this really goes against what I think in my head is supposed to happen. Because in my mind, when I change my life and I'm following him and I'm obeying him, the wind isn't supposed to be against me. In my mind, in my thinking, in my reasoning, and even how I think sometimes we're taught in church is that when you turn your life over to God, that he'll take your burdens away, and all of a sudden everything will work out, that life will be easy. And then you live life and it feels like the wind's against you. And can I just tell you that just because the wind is against you doesn't mean that God isn't with you. And you've got to realize that. Just because the wind is against you doesn't mean that God isn't with you, because many times the confirmation that God has spoken to you and you're head in the right direction is the fact that the wind is against you. Sometimes the very reason the wind is against you is because you're doing what God asked you to do. Just as in this moment, as the disciples are rowing against going to the other side and obeying what Christ told them to do, that the wind was against them at that moment. Because I've learned that there's something against resistance that makes you stronger. And sometimes God will have the wind blow against you so that you can have some resistance in your life, so that you can get stronger in areas that you need to get stronger in. When you're working out, you need to have some resistance. Right? I mean, that's what I've been told. It's not that I do it. But if you're doing a weight and you're doing arm curls, is that how you do that? I mean, usually mine look like this. But when you're doing weights and you have a weight in your hand, so if there's resistance, as you're coming up with the weight, there's resistance so that it builds the muscles. And I find it interesting that Paul especially would talk about that you need to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. You need to work out your salvation. That requires some resistance in your, or the working of your faith. Some resistance is required for the working of your faith. And the fact that the wind is blowing against them, there's resistance that is happening. There's resistance that is taking place. And resistance is often the greatest place that you will experience revelation in your life. I mean, God, look at this. God was wanting to reveal something to them. So he allowed the wind to blow against them because resistance leads to revelation. Some of y'all will get that later. And the fact then that it gets me is that the wind was against them because they obeyed. And that's hard as a Christian. That's hard to understand as a Christian that the wind was against them because they obeyed. It was because they followed his command. I mean, he sent them to Bethsaida. They were going to Bethsaida. I understand, like a couple of weeks ago when I preached on Jonah, I understand that Jonah had the wind against him. That I get. When God calls you to Nineveh and instead you turn and you go to Tarshish, I get it when the wind is against you when you're doing something out of the will of God. I understand that. I can accept that. But it's hard for me to grasp when the wind is against me when I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, when I'm in the will of God, when I'm obedient to him, and the wind seems to be fighting against me. Oh, am I the only one that you struggle with that? That you struggle with that moment of obedience and you expect it to be easier? I mean, when I come to church, I expect my life to be easier. Come on. When I give of my tithes, I expect a raise. That's my thinking that all of a sudden it will get easy when I start to do devotions and become faithful in my daily reading and prayer, that my family life will get better. Those are what I'm thinking. I'm expecting that when I'm obedient to him, that all of a sudden it becomes smooth sailing and I'm able to put up the sails and just go because the wind is going with me and making it easier. But I don't understand is when I tithe and the car breaks down. What I don't understand is when I come to church and I get laid off. And somebody who doesn't even go to church, that heathen, gets a raise. Come on, y'all. I know y'all think it. What I don't understand is when I do what he commands me to do and the wind is against me. And can I just tell you something that you don't want to hear? That it's supposed to be hard. Life is supposed to be this following God. It's supposed to be hard. And I know it's hard for you to grasp because we've been trying to make things easier and easier and easier, and everybody gets a trophy. So everybody's a winner, nobody's a loser. that life is supposed to be you just participate and you win, and it's supposed to be easy, but that's not how it's supposed to be. Your walk with Christ is supposed to be hard. Isn't that uplifting? I mean, it's not me. Jesus said in one of his recruiting sermons of follow me, he said, "In this world you will have trouble, but be of good cheer." That makes no sense. In his instructional words of wisdom that he would give you in order to be a disciple, he would give this for you. He would say, "Take up your cross and follow me." And if you understand that meaning at that time, it would be like saying today, take up your electric chair, because the cross was an instrument, a tool used for death. That's all it represented. It was saying, take up your cross. In other words, you are to die following me. Your will, your motives, your what you want, all that has to die, and you just follow me. Life's hard. And it's supposed to be hard. And I kind of get it a little bit because I begin to realize, because there's those moments in my life where I'll be honest, there's those moments where I was following Christ and I was obeying Him, and the wind was behind me. Oh, I love those moments. Come on, you know what I'm talking about? Where it does get easy. And it's like, wow, this is incredible. I'm following Him and life is smooth. And what I realized, I started thinking it was me and my ability that was making this happen. And I've realized if the wind's always behind me, I start thinking it's my rowing that gets me there faster. It's my ability that got me there faster. I start thinking the wind instead of Him. I start thinking it was me that made the difference instead of Him. And in those moments that the wind is against me, I begin to realize it's a spirit check moment. That I begin to realize that I need Him more. That I can't do this on my own. I know I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, but when it's hard, I call on Him more. I seek out to Him more. I reach out to Him more. Because the wind is against me makes me realize that I need Him in my life to get to where He wants me to be. And that doesn't happen if the wind's always blowing with me. That only happens when the wind is against me. And then look at verse 48 again. Because this catches me. It says, then he saw them straining at rowing. Remember, he had went up on the mountain to pray. They're out at the sea, the wind's against them, and it says that while he's praying, while he's up there, that he saw them straining at rowing, for the wind was against them. So when he was on the mountain praying, and I've heard this, I haven't had the opportunity to go to Israel. I would like to sometime. I think I'll do it in the millennial when it's real peaceful. I don't think I want to go right now. But I've heard some others that they're at the Sea of Galilee. It's really not just this massive, what you'd think of. It's really just a lake. They call it a sea. We would call it a lake. It's fresh water. And there at the Sea of Galilee, around it's these just mountains all around it, and from a vantage point where Jesus would have been praying on top of this mountain because of where the miracle had just happened, where he had fed the 5,000, then he sends the multitudes away. He goes up to pray, and then that area, there would have been a high point where he would have been praying and been able to look out and see the middle of the sea. So when it says that he's praying, and while he's praying, he looks down at this vantage point and he sees them struggling because the wind's against them. He sees them in their struggle while he's praying. I thought such a beautiful picture because I don't know about you, but those times that I feel like I'm alone and I'm struggling and that nobody sees me and that I don't even know if God cares, and in those moments, you know what I'm talking about. Can I tell you, he sees you while you're struggling. He sees you cry those tears that nobody sees. He sees you when you're doubting. He sees you when you're going through it. He sees you as you're trying to convince yourself that you think you can do this, that you really don't know if you have the belief, but you're pressing on and you're struggling. He sees you in that moment, and it's not just that he sees you, but that he is praying for you. He's interceding for you. He's at the right hand of the Father, and he's just seeing you in your struggles, in your life that's hard, and he knows it's hard, and he's praying for you. At that moment, he sees you when you're struggling. Not just does he see you, but look, he comes down to them. He doesn't just stay on the mountaintop and pray when he sees them struggling, but he comes down to them. He didn't just see them straining and walk around to Bethsaida to meet them there, but no, he sees them at that moment and he comes down to where they are walking on water, because he will do the impossible to get to you when he sees you struggling. He'll do whatever it takes. But here, look, show that verse again. Because it says that he sees them straining at rowing, for the wind was against them. Now about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. And this catches me. That last line. And he would have passed them by. That's odd. And they're struggling. He comes walking on the water to them. Why did Mark put in there, and he would have passed them by? You know, he shows himself to them. But I realized something. I don't know if you caught it, but they cried out. In the next verse, it says they cried out. He'll show himself to you, but you have to cry out for him. In other words, he won't force himself into your boat. But he does stop when you cry out. He would have passed them by. He was walking to them, making sure he got close enough for them to see him, but he would have just kept on walking past them if they didn't cry out. it kind of reminds me. There's this one time, I don't know if you remember this miracle in the Bible, but you had this blind man, this blind Bartimaeus, and Jesus is just walking by, and this blind Bartimaeus, he cries out to him because he hears, he says, what's this commotion? There's this crowd following. He doesn't know. He can just hear what's happening. And they said, well, Jesus is walking by. And he begins to cry out, Son of David, have mercy on me. And the people want to hear Jesus speak and don't care about blind Bartimaeus getting a miracle. They just want to hear his wisdom and his knowledge, and they tell blind Bartimaeus, don't interrupt this. We already had this lady with this issue of blood that stopped the show. Not really. That's a different time, but just be quiet. And it says that blind Bartimaeus cried out even louder. And I wonder how many moments that we miss, that Jesus wanted to help you in your struggle, that he wanted to help you at that moment, and he even shows himself to you in a little way, in a faint way, and he's just waiting. Come on, cry out for me. I'll help you. I'm here for you. I saw you struggling. I was praying for you. Come on, I wanted to reveal myself to you right now. Just say something, and because we're silent and say, no, I'll just keep on rowing. I can do it myself. How many times has he passed us by because we missed the moment? Ooh. I know it's a small crowd because it's Father's Day, but you can still amen. Or go, ouch, something. I wonder how many times we've missed our moments because we're so caught up in what we were rowing after, rowing for, that when he reveals himself, we miss it. And how many times has he passed us by in the moment? But the disciples, they cry out. They cry out, and it's every time that I've read and focused on the story of Jesus walking on water, I usually never read out of Mark. I read out of Matthew because when Matthew tells the story, Matthew is there. Matthew is one of the disciples. Mark was not a disciple. I don't know if y'all know that. Well, he was a disciple of Christ. He just wasn't one of the 12 disciples. He wasn't there when Jesus walked on water. Matthew was. So I usually go to Matthew because Matthew puts in more detail, and Mark leaves out some stuff. And when you read Matthew, and let me just read that, see if you can catch what I'm talking about. That something that Mark left out that Matthew puts in. When Matthew writes it in Matthew 14, he's there and he's writing, and it says now, verse 25, now in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went to them walking on the sea. That sounds familiar. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying it was a ghost, and they cried out for fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, be of good cheer, it is I, do not be afraid. All that sounds familiar. It all kind of goes just as Mark is describing it, and then it gets different. It says, and Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. So he said, come. And when Peter had come down out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. Mark doesn't say anything about that. Mark doesn't say anything about Peter getting out of the boat and walking on water. That's kind of odd. I mean, Matthew, I get it. Matthew was there. He was one of the disciples. He's telling it as he sees it, and he tells about Peter walking on the water too, but Mark leaves out this detail altogether. And I find it strange because if you know the history of this, Mark, who wasn't there because he wasn't one of the 12, Mark got his information from someone else. And scholars will tell you Mark got all of his information from Peter. Doesn't that surprise you then that that's left out? Because Peter shares with Mark, here's what happened. Here's the story of Christ. And Peter is sharing with Mark all this information of how he followed him and everything that he did. And Mark's writing it all down. The Gospel of Mark is through Peter's eyes. And he gets to this story of Jesus walking on water. And Peter decides, hey, that part where I walked on water, leave that out. And I find it strange because if I ever walk on water and I'm writing a biography or I'm telling a ghostwriter about my story, you write it out. When I get to the part where I'm walking on water, you better believe I'm not leaving that out. Come on. That's on the cover of the book. It would be a picture, Photoshop me in the waves doing this. I mean, it is going to be in the book. It's going to be a whole chapter of just how I felt while I was walking on the water. I will explain in detail those 2 steps I took. You better believe that's making the book. So it surprises me that when Mark's writing it, and he's writing it from Peter's eyes, that it's not in there. Maybe it's not in just because there's 30 years that has passed from Mark writing this and Peter actually walking on water. Maybe, I'm sure Peter didn't forget that he walked. Come on. I'm sure Peter didn't just somehow, that slipped my mind. Mark going, I heard Matthew talking about that you got out and walked too. Oh, I forgot about that. We should have put that in. I don't think that's how it went. Instead, I believe this. After some time, come on, Shelby, will you come back up? There's been 30 years that has passed. And Peter's had some time to really reflect on this moment. And he's had some time to reflect on what really mattered, what God was trying to show them. And at this moment, as I'm just picturing within, as Mark probably, I'm sure he's heard the story too of Peter walking on water. And as he's writing, he gets to this point, I can just almost hear Peter or Mark say to Peter, now should I put in, remember you got out of the boat and you walked to him. That was really cool. Do you want me to put that in? And Peter just going, no, that doesn't matter. Because I've had some time, and the fact that I got out of the boat isn't what's important. Don't tell them about what happened when I got out. Tell them about what happened when he got in. That's what matters. Doesn't matter what happened when I got out of the boat. Been too much focus on that, but you tell them about what happened when he got in, because when he got in, the wind stopped. When he got in, the storm stopped. When he got in the boat, everything changed. You tell them about the time that he got in the boat. You leave out the part where I got out, because it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I'm afraid we focus so much about me, what I can do, what I've done. And when we tell the stories, it's, I did this, I did that, I did. And I'm thinking back to Peter of like, that doesn't matter. But this does. Your focus was all wrong. Because look at what he put in verse 51. It says this is what I want you to put in Mark. Went up into the boat to them, and the wind ceased. And they were greatly amazed in themselves, beyond measure, and marveled. Not because Peter got out, but because Jesus got in. Well, will you stand with me? After 30 years, Peter realizes something different. He's had time to reflect on the lesson and what Jesus was teaching them. And you don't see this in Matthew, but you see this in Mark in this next verse, because he's saying, look, there's something I want you to understand. Here's the reason why Jesus did this. And this caught me. The very next verse, after Jesus gets in the boat, the wind ceases. Peter explains to Mark this. For we didn't understand. He did this because we didn't understand about the loaves. Because our hearts were hardened. Really? I missed something there. He walked on water. He gets in the boat. The wind stops. And Peter says, here's why. Because we didn't understand the loaves. Peter, you're looking pretty deep. What does this have to do with this? Because if you read the chapter, Jesus had just fed the 5,000. He had just fed 5,000. A miracle so spectacular. It's the only miracle besides his resurrection that makes it in all four Gospels, the feeding of the 5,000. Not the virgin birth, not even Jesus walking on water, just the feeding of the 5,000. It makes it in all four Gospels. And it goes from there that he sends that multitude away, and then this happens, and Peter goes, he did this because we didn't understand the loaves. What are you talking about? Well, Mark, I thought the feeding of the 5,000 was because we were hungry. I thought it was all about us. I thought everything was about me. And in fact, the feeding of the 5,000, he was trying to reveal to us who he was, and we missed the moment. So he does something else, even more spectacular, so we don't miss the moment. He gets the focus off of me and back on him. This is why he did this. So the part where I walked on water, you better leave that out. Because I'm not putting the focus back on me. It's on him. This matters. This matters. Let me ask you, what have you been focusing on got your focus messed up and you've missed moments because you were focusing on other things that really don't even matter. He's come to you and you've let him pass you by because you were focused on what didn't matter. He does something great and you miss it because you thought it was about you and not about him, because your focus wasn't on what really matters. God wants to bring that focus back. What counts? What matters most? Don't miss those moments. Why don't you bow your heads with me? Father, I thank you. God, I thank you that you always are watching. You're always teaching. You're always praying. You're always interceding. And God, as you come into this place this morning, and I feel your presence as you begin to walk past certain ones, God, don't let them miss their moments. Don't let them be so focused on the straining, on the struggle, on the situation, on life, that they miss what matters most. Don't let them get so focused on the miracle that they just think it was all about them and they miss you even in it, God. Let them see what matters. As you stretch us in those moments. And this morning, I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask you to spend a little time and refocus. So we just spent a little time in worship. Shelby plays and she sings. I'm going to ask what is the Holy Spirit speaking to you right now? What is it that he's trying to reveal to you? Have you been so focused on the resistance that you've missed the revelation? What is it he's trying to reveal to you? What's he trying to say as he gets your focus back on, will you just listen to him? As we worship, hey, these altars are open. I'm also going to ask the prayer team, if you will, if you'll kind of just go to the side here, and if you need prayer this morning for anything, so we just spent some time in worship. If you need prayer, you can come to one of these. They'll pray for you. But don't leave just yet. Just allow the Spirit to speak to you as we just worship him.
Through generations.